Castle Grayskull, fortress of mystery and power for He-Man and his foes. It's definitely one of the most recognizable playsets in pop culture and probably one of the more recognizable castles of pop culture. And stop right there with your Camelot and all that stuff. Of course, people recognize other castles. I'm not saying it's the only recognizable one. Of course, there's others. And one of the interesting aspects of Castle Grayskull is that it sits on top of a giant pit known as the Abyss. In fact, there's been episodes named after this, and episodes that take place in it, with both He-Man and Teela at one point taking a fall into it. Not all the way to the bottom. They fortunately landed on one of those little, cliff edges there. But the Abyss of Castle Grayskull is one of the more important locations for Masters of the Universe, and there's a lot of storyline involved with it. We eventually did a whole map of the inside of Eternia, showing the full Abyss all the way to the center of the planet. And that's what this video is about. So to start with the history of the Abyss of Castle Grayskull, we have to start with the prototype of Castle Grayskull. So the original version, which was drawn by Mark Taylor, one of the Mattel designers from back in the early 80s, was called the Dwell of Souls, not to be confused with the Well of Souls from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Actually, Raiders of the Lost Ark was just the name, but you get the point. So while it was changed to Castle Grayskull, the concept of the Dwell of Souls, this endless pit, was still considered part of the essence of the playset, and it was going to be represented by a play mat that came with the playset that you would put underneath it. Here you can see it in the prototype. So here is what Taylor called the Stygian moat, which would have been that playmat that came with the castle, so that you could represent this, endless abyss that surrounded the castle, and which is why you needed the drawbridge to cross it. Well, the playmat didn't last, but the concept of an abyss under the castle sort of made it into the final product in the form of the dungeon sticker, which you have to admit is very, very unique as far as Masters of the Universe is concerned, where you have all these tentacles and bare arms and eyeballs trying to claw out of it. The Horsemen did sculpt this for the playset, but unfortunately, due to the tooling and cost, especially the deco cost, we just couldn't include it with the castle. We looked at selling it as a unique piece later on, but unfortunately, that never happened. But this cage, this abyss, has kind of lived on in pop culture because it's very unique, especially as far as the Masters brand. You don't see anything else quite like that. So while the Abyss started off as the Dwell of Souls and this Stygian moat that Mark Taylor created, it went on, especially in Filmation, to really be a key location because it was the reason for the drawbridge, and it was what protected the castle. You couldn't get to it unless you could lower the drawbridge. So the story of the Abyss goes all the way back to the beginning of time in Masters of the Universe, when the power of the universe, like a giant wave of energy, swept through the universe. It was then captured by the overlords of Trala, that's Orko's people, and infused into a sword called the Sword of He being the Tralan word for power. So the power sword, or the Sword of He, contained the power of the universe. But what about the magic of the universe? So the magic was different than the power. The magic of the universe was stored as a giant orb, and in order to hide it from those who would abuse it, it was put in the center of planet Eternia, which was in the center of Eternia's dimension. It was like the planet in the very center. And the idea was that only this way, only good guys, bad guys, well, actually nobody would be able to get to it. It's used in Filmation at one point in an episode where both He-Man and Skeletor are trying to get to it in the center of the planet. And it became known as the starseed. So the starseed contained all of the magic of the universe, which is a direct parallel, kind of the yin and yang of the power of the universe, and became really the two forces that were hidden inside of Castle Grayskull, and that's what we're going to get into and explain. So the planet Eternia was chosen as its hiding place, and the starseed was placed there in the very, very center so that could be hidden away, and hopefully no one will be able to find it, because this was a sort of backwater planet, far away from the Horde Empire and the Tri-Solar System. And in order to guard the starseed, a giant immortal being called Procrustes was assigned to stand guard over it, so that anyone who tried to get it would have to face his wrath. All right, so in order to understand Procrustes, we have to kind of look at some of the early Motu mini-comics. And to say that there were some odd, kind of weird things in these mini-comics is a bit of an understatement. I mean, characters were off-model, they were colored differently, sometimes they were clones of each other, sometimes they weren't clones of each other, all sorts of kind of off-model, off-canon, off-story things were happening until Filmation came and kind of codified everything as one storyline. In fact, you could even see Stratos there hanging out as one of Skeletor's flunkies in an early mini-comic, right between Beastman and Merman. Not only is he a Skeletor flunky, but he's also colored very different from the toy. Of course, one mini-comic later, he would apparently be promoted to a good guy, with no explanation of why he switched sides. So, hey, what can I say? Reasons. So, odd things that happened in the mini comics aside, and just noting that as a rationale for why there were sort of odd things going on, and no one was really overseeing this as a continuity in the canon, a character named Procrustes makes an appearance in one mini comic only, and he's noted as the god who holds Eternia together. That's why he's got 4 giant arms. He's in charge of being in the center of the planet and literally holding the planet from falling apart. So, very interesting. And he only made one appearance, but this was kind of all about what Motu Classics was about, was kind of incorporating these sort of like weird one-off things that went back to the very beginning of the brand and were honestly cool because, come on, a giant 4-armed giant made of stone that lives in the center of the planet, who wouldn't want an action figure of that? I mean, come on, it's like it had to be done. And it was done. We did an awesome figure of him. And look what he's holding in his hand there as an accessory. It's the starseed. So there's also a huge rationale for this. He was at giant scale, by the way. He was as big as Megator and Titus. He was the 3rd giant. We had plans for other giants, like the ABC giants from the Buzz-Off episode of 2000X, but unfortunately we just ran out of time and never got to them. But hey, we didn't tool these giant bodies not to reuse them. All right, so why does the starseed come with Procrustes? And, it's taken directly from a Filmation episode. You saw that yellow orb in the Filmation shot earlier. So when looking at everything happening in Masters of the Universe and looking at what was happening down in that abyss, the 2 things that had been established are that the starseed is down there and that Procrustes is down there holding the planet together. And the idea with Classics was really to find a way to codify all of these stories and make them work together. So to start with, you have to go back to King Grayskull's time when he was fighting against Hordak. Hordak had invaded Eternia trying to find Hero to steal the sword. He created a magical spell to try to send King Grayskull to Despondos, but the spell backfired, and you can see this in episode 35, and the spell is what literally created the Abyss. The spell drove down and separated Grayskull from the landmass with a giant abyss. So that was the origin of the physical abyss. But what's going on down there, the story's not even close to done yet. In another 2000X episode called Separation, we learn that Hordak had used a spell and a magical tablet to attempt to break apart planet Eternia to get to the starseed. That was his other goal. Once he learned the starseed was hidden on Eternia, besides trying to get the sword, which Hero had brought there, he wanted to get inside the planet to get the starseed, because if he got the starseed and the sword, he'd be pretty much, all powerful. But he wasn't powerful enough to do the spell, and instead of breaking apart the planet to get to the yummy starseed center, what he did was he created the 2 hemispheres, the light hemisphere and the dark hemisphere. And that's why there's, an upside and a downside, as, Dark Helmet says. There's 2 different sides. Now, one of Skeletor's flunkies, Too Bad, who was made up of 2 different bounty hunters named, shockingly, Tuvar and Badra, well, when they were combined into one character by Skeletor, they obviously wanted to get uncombined, and they were able to locate Hordak's tablet, and they thought that this spell would let them separate and become 2 people again. But the spell wasn't really about that. Eventually, the tablet finds its way into the hands of the Unnamed One, who was an ancient Trollan, and one who was the reason why the power of the universe had to be put in the sword in the first place, to keep it away from this guy. He's been searching for it for centuries. So when he's finally able to make it back to Eternia, he gets the tablet, and he is able to cast the spell that Hordak was not powerful enough to cast. And in doing this, he successfully breaks the planet in two, and literally shatters it, so that he can get to that starseed. And you can see, as he's breaking the planet apart, there is Procrustes in the center, guarding the starseed, doing his duty, and, failing, basically. Not failing, it's not his fault. He wasn't expecting the planet to be actually separated in two. But you can see him there in one of his rare appearances in the mini-comics, trying to, guard the starseed there. You see it as that orb there next to him. So the planet, of course, is saved. First, the different magicians, the mages of Eternia, including Orko, the sorceress, and Master Sabian, and the Green Goddess, all attempt to use their magic powers together to reseal the planet. Evelyn eventually joins them, but they're still not powerful enough, and the planet is still separating. But fortunately for, reason and fate, and, to introduce a character that could potentially be another action figure, because that was the whole point of the mini-comics, was to introduce as many characters as possible with the hopes that we can make figures of them, we brought in Tug-O-War from the Vintage mini-comics, a character that only appeared once in the Vintage mini-comics for no reason at all, so we thought he'd be a great character to also show up for no reason at all. He is the master of the cosmic balance. Shall only appear when the balance of scales must be tipped. In the Vintage comics, he shows up in a literal tug-of-war and then disappears again. So the idea was that he was this character who would always show up just when they needed a little extra help, whether it was a tug-of-war fight or trying to get Eternia back together again. So he uses his magic rope, not to be confused with the lasso of truth, and is able to seal Eternia again so that it doesn't, drift apart as two hemispheres and, kill everybody on the planet. And once it's sealed back up again and, pasted with duct tape, he's like, okay, well, my job is done, and as the magic, as the master of cosmic balance, I'm out of here. And much like in the original Vintage mini-comics, when he just showed up for that tug-of-war to add a little extra oomph on one side, he's done his job now in the new mini-comics, and he leaves saying his work is done and you shall never see him again, which is, one of those comic, motifs that happens a lot of times with powerful characters. All right, so the Unnamed One has separated the planet. He's stolen the starseed, and you can see it there during the final battle. He has it in his arms, and he's using it against Hero, Dare 2, the second hero, the son of He-Man, and they have their giant battle. Of course, Hero wins, but now what do you do with the starseed? Well, they build a new Castle Grayskull out of magic energy, and it's used to house the starseed now, since the old Castle Grayskull was destroyed. And, more on that on a different video. But it's in the mini-comic 5, I believe, is when it's destroyed. So, going back to Procrustes there in the center of the planet, you can see him after Hordak's spell. That's why he needs to hold the planet together, as in the original mini-comics. He's both guarding the starseed, but when Hordak tried to split the planet, and you can see the crack there going through the full planet, he's literally holding it together, exactly what's described in the Vintage mini-comic. So he's got two jobs, to hold the planet together and guard the starseed. And you can see energy from that abyss flowing up directly from the starseed to Castle Grayskull, as well as up to the central tower, which is above him. So that is why both Central Tower and Castle Grayskull are such magical places. They literally have abysses directly to the center of the planet where the starseed is, guarded by Procrustes, holding the planet together after Hordak's failed attempt to crack it open and just creating the two hemispheres instead of getting into the juicy center. And then in the diagram of Castle Grayskull that Axel drew, which he did an amazing job, you can see, again, the abyss there going all the way down to the center of the planet, created by Hordak's Despondo spell, and that's the energy of the starseed flowing up directly into the castle. So the castle receives the energy of the starseed, the magic, and it has the orb of power from the Sword of Power. So there you go. That's the story of the Abyss of Castle Grayskull. I hope you enjoyed this, and please do leave comments and suggestions below. I respond to all. Like this and subscribe because it tells YouTube to share it with more people. And that's what this is all about, sharing toy love. Thanks for watching.